Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ask an IEP Coach with Exceptional Families of the Military. I'm just going to very quickly talk to you about why we're here today. And my name is Rebecca Emerson. I am the EFM Executive Director, and this is my son, who also wanted to be in on the live. And Exceptional Families of the Military is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we specialize in helping EFMP families. We have support groups, and we do direct support. And we also advocate on our families' behalf with DoD, DHA leadership, and also with lawmakers. So that's what we do in short. And sometimes our families are looking for answers about special education. And I know that I've experienced some issues in this arena with IEPs, with my son's transition, my youngest son's transition from IFSP to IEP, to where I was looking for additional help. So we're here today with Carney just to talk about IEPs and also talk about what she does as a coach. So I will kick it on over to Austin for a quick introduction.
Good evening. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Austin Carrig. I'm the CEO here at Exceptional Families of the Military. Just like many of you, I have children who have IEPs, and we've been in the unfortunate process that we've had to go to due process, and we're now in federal court. So you're definitely not alone in a lot of the frustrations that you're having, and I'm really hopeful that tonight you'll learn some tools to take back with you to make you feel more equipped moving forward.
And I'll just introduce Carney, if you want to talk about yourself.
Good evening. I'm Carney Doherty, and I am an IEP coach. I work with families all across the nation, but I'm based in Maryland. And I have been working in the special education field for 20 years now. I was a special educator and administrator. But now I work as an IEP coach with families to help parents through the process at the IEP table. And I was trained through the Master IEP Coach program. And through that, I worked as on an online, and you can work as an online or an in-person training. And this program is also a nationwide program for parents, teachers, administrators, and therapists. Just to let you a little bit in on the program, I'll put the link in the comments. But this program is what it does is it talks about being idea bringers, solution finders, and team builders at the IEP table. So I will put the link to the program. It was started by Catherine Witcher. And if you would like more resources or information about trainings, there's actually one starting this month or next month in January. And you could find out more about that. So I will add that to the chat. Maybe, I'm not sure I can add it myself, but and then I will
I can add it for you, Carney.
Yep.
If you want to drop it in the private chat, I'll add it.
I just did. Thank you so much. I wanted to talk to you tonight a little bit more about some tips and some ways just to help you with at IEP meetings or other ideas. Just to reassure you that you are an equal IEP member at the table and during the whole IEP process. So make sure to ask questions and to seek clarification throughout the process. Ask your concerns and any terminology you have in any kind of plain language. Request documents you have or that they may be prepared for you in writing prior to the meeting. Those kind of documents may be the draft IEP. They might be any assessments or evaluations that may be occurred. You want to have time to review those documents ahead of time prior to the meeting so that you have time to make notes and you have time to review those prior to the meeting so that you can feel prepared to review them and discuss them at the meeting. You want to know your child's annual and reevaluation dates so that you're prepared at the meeting. You want to make sure that you have time in your schedule to confirm those dates when it comes time for those meetings. Prior to any meetings, you should submit a parent input statement that talks about your vision and your goal for your child, also any strengths or interests your child may have, and any needs or concerns that you have. And you can submit that in writing when they send the meeting invitation letter to you. Documentation is key. So anything that you have, you want to document in writing. Any conversations you have with teachers, staff, make sure you document it. Conversations you may have in person, you can email back just to summarize what you had and confirm that that's what happened. That way you have it in writing and it's documented. Keeping everything organized will help you when the meeting time comes. One thing that I always say is to take someone with you to the meeting, whether it's a friend, a family member, an advocate, but that way you feel supported at the meeting. Someone who could take notes for you, someone who can be a support to you. Oftentimes you may have feelings that come up or emotions that come up, but this person could be there to hear what you may not hear, take notes for you. Really, the goal of the meeting for the whole team is to stay child focused. And so you want to make sure that you are working with the team to keep emotions out of the meeting and stay child focused and collaborative. Oftentimes this gets a little bit difficult, so we want to make sure that we are working on the problem solving and being solution driven. I'm trying to read the chat as well.
I can read it for you. We just had one
Okay.
comment in there from the infographic. It was a question / comment. I just got my IEP for my youngest today, and they told me I need to re-enroll him in the school to test the IEP in order to see if he needs a lower student to teacher classroom setting for my child's safety as well as other students and staff. I had to pull him out to homeschool him.
Okay, so I think this, along with some of the other questions that we got from the original posting that had to do with services or changing in services, has a lot to do with data. So in order for things to be changed on the IEP, data has to be there to back it up. So we want to make sure that a meeting is called before anything is changed for the student. And I just want to make sure that I'm reading this right. And re-enroll them to test. They told me.
So I think I know what they're saying here. I think they're saying they're a homeschool family that had taken their child out of school, and they're now being told they have to re-enroll that child in school to test to see if they need a smaller student to teacher ratio. I feel like this came up in one of our groups, if I'm remembering it correctly, and that they can't place the child back where they were pre-homeschool. And so now the parent feels like they can't leave him in the public school, and they've pulled him out again.
Okay. Well, the child deserves to be in the general ed and least restrictive environment, no matter what. So unless they have data to show that he cannot be there for other reasons, then he should be able to be there. The other thing is that unless they have a policy, a written policy that states that, then there's no reason why he can't be there. So those are things that they can request from the school, a written policy, or the school needs to have data to show there's a safety concern, or they need to have data to show that he can't be in that restrictive of an environment.
Can you explain to families what least restrictive environment is? I feel like sometimes schools kind of paraphrase it in a way that's not always the same as parents move.
Sure. So there's almost like a pyramid of different types of environments. The most restrictive would be like home and hospital or a separate day school. And the least restrictive environment would be a general education classroom with no supports, no services at all. So no IEP, that would be least restrictive. And so as you go up the pyramid, you're getting more restrictive, which means you're just getting more supports and more services, and you're getting less time with peers that do not have special education services. Does that clarify it a little bit more? Okay.
I think that helps a lot. You know, a lot of us who've been around the table for a while, like I have adult children, least restrictive environment, I know what that is, but some of our newer parents may not as they're transitioning from IFSPs. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another question, and I think we could probably tag team this one. Are there special ed advocates within the military branches to help pro bono, or do I have to hire one? So there are, it depends on what branch of service you're in, whether or not the family support side of the house can attend an IEP meeting or not with you. And it also depends, you can go in and ask your JAG office for help, but it kind of depends on where you're at and whether or not the JAG office has the ability to assist you. So that all being said, you usually do have to, you know, you are kind of on your own to work through it, or hire an advocate. Maybe if Carney or Austin have any other suggestions on places that you can go to get help.
So this mom, I just want to point out, this mom said that they are Army. And so the Army and the Air Force share the same program. But I'll pass it over to you, Carney.
The only other place which I wouldn't say is necessarily military would be, depending on where you're living locally, each district has their own, or each state has their own special education network or center, which you can look up online. They're all called different things. They're usually a parent center, which has some information, and sometimes they have people, but they're not necessarily going to come to a meeting, but they may provide you with some information.
If I can add to this, if you're an Army family, your JAG should be offering you a pro bono kind of liaison handoff if they're unable to help you. Now, we understand that that doesn't always happen, and what should occur doesn't, but I would follow back up and ask them that same thing. You know, it's my understanding that you guys were trained in this. If you can't help me, can you help me find a pro bono attorney or advocate that would take on this case?
And the same, also another question from Stacey Vance is, I think, well, not a question, but more of a statement. And I think this resonates with a lot of military families. When you move to a new state, you know, what are some tips that you can give us for the transition period when you're moving from one place to the next?
I think the first thing to do is, as soon as you find out you're moving, make sure you have all your documentation lined up. And included in that is to get a updated teacher report from the current teacher. So that's just going to allow you to have the most recent documentation. Even if it's an informal report, at least you're getting the most updated information from their current providers. So even if they have a speech language provider or an occupational therapist, whatever providers they have, I would request an updated service report or updated report from them. And then get all your documentation together, and then contact whoever you need to contact in the military that in order to find out who your next point of contact is, or what the next area is that you're moving to, so that you can send that to the next school. Because the sooner that you send it to the next school, the better. Even if it's over the summer, you want to send it over so you can get that meeting scheduled. Because the sooner that the school has the documentation, the sooner that you'll be able to start the process. And then the timeline is the same no matter what. So some states have different timelines in terms of, is it 15 days once they come into school versus 30 days for a comparable IEP? But they still have to have a comparable IEP. So that does not change. So you want to make sure that you have those things aligned. And then you'll have that meeting and then discuss whether evaluations are needed or not.
And I just wanted to add Stephanie Waterhouse to the stream. So she came in a little bit late, but I think her question had to do with preschool. I don't know if you want to talk about some of your struggles, if you have questions for Carney. Stephanie.
Yeah.
Over to Stephanie.
So, sorry. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, so we moved from Moore County, North Carolina, to Fairfax County, and one of the problems that we had was that Moore County had an inclusive preschool through the county. It was pretty easy to get into. It was kind of, inclusion was the standard. And then when we moved to Fairfax County, they don't have an inclusive preschool. And even though my son's LRE was determined to be an inclusive preschool environment, Fairfax County, even in his transfer IEP, actually changed his LRE. So it was very frustrating because we kind of came in fighting for what he should have had access to. And so I guess my question is, like, what do we do when we move from one area to another and there's just a severe deficit in things that they had access to? And it's not even, for us, it was just LRE. It wasn't even just like, oh, they don't, my son has Down syndrome, but for like autism, it wasn't that they didn't have like an autism program. It was just, they didn't even have an inclusive preschool. So I guess been fighting for that and kind of other ways, because the move from Fort Bragg to Fairfax County, which is outside of DC, like a lot of military families make that move. And so,
Mm-hmm.
how do you, how are we supposed to navigate that when you're talking about the 11th largest school district in the nation?
So I think one of the things that we strive to do as IEP coaches, or I strive to do as an IEP coach, is to think outside the box and to, try and bring solutions to the table. You don't have to have a program for a child to fit into. We can create, it's an individualized IEP program. So this is for this child. So these are, the supports and services that this child needs based on this. It's not a checkbox, LRE checkbox. So everything that comes before the LRE page, which is on the last page of the IEP, and I'm speaking to this as someone who's written way too many IEPs in my day. I know where that LRE page is. It's at the end of the IEP. This is after you do the present levels of performance to tell you everything, what the child can do and where his needs are, after we talk about what accommodations and modifications he or she may need, after we talk about what supports they need, after we talk about what goals they need, after we talk about what services they're going to get, then we talk about the least restrictive environment. So wherever all those supports and services and accommodations and all of those things can occur, that can be done. It doesn't have to happen in one specific program or place. Special education is not a place. It is a program. It is something that occurs. It can happen anywhere. It should happen everywhere that this child goes throughout the school day, throughout his entire day, so that he can continue to make progress for further education, employment, and independent living. This is what IDEA, the law, intended special education to be. So we are not going to just click a box for LRE in a specific program. We are going to bring solutions to the table so that any child who has these supports and services on his IEP can receive these supports and services anywhere during the school day. And that's what I would bring to the table.
I'm just curious about private placement. So, as an option, a lot of people don't know about that. Maybe you could talk about private placement. Like, what is that? And, how would you go about asking for something like that, especially in a case where maybe that, the inclusive preschool case, for example, you go from one state to the next and preschool looks very different.
So in terms of private placement, there are different ways to think about it, because there are some types of private placement where there are non-public schools where if the public school can't meet the needs of the student because they don't have the supports and services in the county programs or county schools, then they may pay for students to go to certain programs or placements. That's one type. Or the parent may decide, I want to place my child in this program, but I want the county to pay for it. So if it's a team decision, that may be one thing. But if it's a parent-led decision, that may be another. So if the IEP is driving the decision in one regard, because that's the only place that the IEP can be upheld, then that's one thing. But if the IEP can be worked on in a in several different placements, or in maybe a county program or the public or the private placement, then the county program would be where you would place the student. Is that where we're so it comes down to a team decision. It's not one person's decision, unless the parent decides to send the kid to the private placement. But
thank you. So another question that had come in was, can bullying be brought up in an IEP meeting? And we hear this a lot.
Yes.
So being bullied.
Bullying definitely can be brought up in an IEP meeting, especially if it's impacting the child. But bullying, that's not the only place bullying can be brought up, because bullying has a whole nother aspect to it. There's a social emotional aspect to it, and there's I don't want to say disciplinary, but there is a disciplinary aspect to it. And usually there's a counselor and administrator who kind of takes over that piece of it for the whole school. So it's not just a special education issue for any school. So there's usually paperwork involved with bullying at any school. And so that person should definitely be invited to the meeting if the parent knows that they're going to be bringing it up, so that staff member is involved and can fill out that paperwork and get that process started. So if you are going to bring up if you're going to bring up bullying at the meeting, I would let the school team know ahead of time, just so that they can invite that team member to the meeting, so that they are aware of that conversation and can be a part of it as well.
To follow up on that, I know my child had issues with bullying, and one of our school districts in Massachusetts actually put a blurb in there that says the school acknowledges that due to his disability, he was more likely to be bullied, and that it was their responsibility to make sure that didn't happen. We were shocked when we moved and the new school refused to put that in the IEP. And I know that there are changes like that that can occur when we move state to state. Can you explain to families how, you can have something in place in an IEP, but when you move to a new state, the new state or the new school will say, we don't do that, and why?
So the federal law, IDEA, is the broad umbrella under which special education law falls. And then states can change their policies, but they have to follow that law. So under which the bullying policy in Massachusetts could fall under how they implemented that on the IEP. Whatever state you then move to may not have that same policy. So those types of things may change state to state. Just like as you move from state to state, there may be changes in, the policies on how you enter into the school, enrollment, those types of things. All those things can shift and change state to state or even district to district. But the overall guidelines and the overall law stay the same. So even though the evaluation procedure that are 60 days and 90 days, they may change between 45 days and 65 days or 75 days state to state, but they have to be at 60 to 90 days as the max. So things like that can shift state to state. But you can always ask for the written policy. If you have a question for the school, and if they can't give it to you, then you can say, I'd rather that not happen. – That's always something you can ask for the school. There were some other questions that were brought up during the initial post. And this was one of them, where one specific team member that you were having issues with. And it's difficult because there has to be certain team members at every IEP meeting. And that list is very specific. So it depends who the team member is. If it's their special educator or general educator, there has to be an administrator there. If there's certain evaluations done, or if they have certain related service providers, they have to be in attendance. So it would be difficult if that team member wasn't at the meeting, and it wouldn't be a complete meeting if you left one person out. What you can do is, and I will give you a link to a blog I wrote about kindness and special education, because I think it really speaks to trying to keep things child focused, and even sharing this with the school team or even the administrator of this school may be helpful. Is that our personal feelings sometimes get in the way, but this isn't about us. And this isn't about the staff. And as a former special educator and administrator, sometimes it was tough because, I felt like parents were attacking me, but their feelings were, they were hearing a lot of tough things about their children. And so I had to kind of check myself and be like, I need to take a step back too, because we're all going through a lot right now. So we need to remember that this is about the child, and we need to all be in a collaborative, communicative roles right now for the child. So I will give you the blog to read. I'll give you the link to read for the blog. But it's always worth going to the administrator or going to the special ed, head, and saying, I'm having a tough time with this person, depending who that person is in that role. If it's the administrator, maybe go to the other person. Because if it's causing turmoil in the entire team, then, it may be time to speak to someone privately about it. But in order to have a full team meeting, you have to have everyone in attendance. So,
Carney, I just have a follow-up question on that one. Could you give an example of maybe a tactic to kind of diffuse the situation, right? So you're in the meeting, maybe I feel attacked as a parent, maybe the teacher's feeling attacked from me. I don't know, like there's lots of feelings going on in the room. What would be a good way to kind of make it, or some language used to force it back to that, child-centric viewpoint?
So, one of the things that I've done in the past, or some of my colleagues have done in the past, is to either take a 5-minute break, because we can always take a 5-minute break, or to kind of change the topic. So we're kind of getting off that topic. Let's say we're talking about behavior. So we're coming back to speech, or we're coming back to this report over here, or we're moving on to the next agenda item. So let's table this for the moment, and we'll move on to the next agenda item, and we'll circle back to that. So things like that can always be, circled back to. The other thing is if I'm the one that's starting to get worked up, then I kind of just shift my attention away from that person. And, I just take a break from them, because if I'm feeling attacked by that person, I can't focus on them and have a discussion with them right now. and luckily at that point, it's not a one-on-one. There are, 5 to 7 more people in the room. So I can, focus on my conversations with the other people in the room.
Thank you. We had another question come in to the chat from the live, which is, what can you do when your child is moved the last month before school ends and the new state doesn't want to make accommodations because it's so late in the year and there's no time for new meetings?
So they have to look at the IEP because legally they have to look at the IEP. They can't just say, you're coming in with an IEP, but I'm not going to look at it because there's 30 days before school gets out. You can't do that. So you can quote the, IDEA law. You can give them the IEP, and you can contact the special ed office, above them and say they're not providing services. I'm not the one that likes to go higher up, but your child needs services. You want to get the process started. So,
yeah,
you contact me. That's what you do. I'm sorry, but and we'll talk.
Yeah, definitely. You can always contact an advocate, and it is possible, though. I'll just say to the person who put the question in, we just moved this past summer, and I was able to start ESY within days of us moving here, and it took a lot of work on my part, to be honest, but they attended the new school, attended his old school's last IEP meeting as well, and because it was all virtual, and we were able to work together for a smooth transition. But I did have to personally hand massage that, to like make that happen for my child. And there's a follow-up question, the same person. I'll just pop it up here. What happens when the district asks me to disenroll and wait till the following year?
Don't. And you call every day. I mean, if you're enrolled in the school, you have the date of enrollment, and you have that documentation. So then they're in violation. They're out of compliance. So
if I can say, as a mom, this has happened to us. Our school ignored our enrollment. They didn't ask us to unenroll. They just chose to ignore the fact that we enrolled. And if I had unenrolled, then my child would have lost the right to compensatory education services. But because we stayed there, when we were able to get somebody to help us fight the school, our child was able to get all of the special education hours that they were owed from prior to the enrollment. So please, please, please don't take your child out. You're legally required to enroll your child in school if they're school age and, over kindergarten. So you can get in trouble yourself as well. Please leave them there and reach out to somebody for assistance.
I'll also add on that one thing that was always really that I had to learn as a parent was when they said those kinds of things that just weren't right, is to email, like if they verbally said it, to then email it back to them. That way it was all in writing. So as I started pushing things up and saying, kind of doing some pushback, then it was all in writing. So that way, maybe Kearney's already talked about this. I'm sorry if you have, but for me, that was always really helpful. If a teacher called me, didn't want to put it in email, I was literally typing up the email back to her as she was talking.
Yep. And I just add on the end, please let me know if I've missed anything. And that's how I end the email, that I summarize back to them. That way, if they don't respond, I've given them the option to, come back and clarify anything. So.
There's another question. When you move to another school district in the same state, your child's new school needs to provide what's known as comparable services. That means the school, oh, that's not a question. Sorry.
Oh.
That was just a comment. Oh, my bad.
So if I could jump in, I feel like every IEP meeting for me is the school telling me all of the things my child can't do. I have to mentally prepare myself to walk in the room and hear all of the things my child can't do. But we actually got another comment before our live that says, is it typical in an IEP meeting to feel like the school is telling your kid is doing great because they don't have the resources or don't want to offer you the resources you think your child can use? So can you talk to us kind of about both sides of this?
Yeah, so I saw that. I first saw the question that said, why do IEP meetings feel so tough? And I think we've kind of heard, a little bit about that, and we've touched upon a little bit about that. But then as far as, getting this information about how he's doing so great, and I've been hearing a lot about this year, that they're getting A's and B's, and then the parents are seeing work come home and they're like, and the kids crying over homework, and you're just like, what? I don't understand. You have to ask for more data. And I hate to say we keep putting this all on you, but you have to ask for more data. There's testing that goes on. There's, mid-year, 3 times a year testing in a lot of different states. Keep that homework. Keep those different things that come home. Just take picture with your phone. There you go. You have it. So that work that comes home that's half done, or that's, 3 out of 10, take a picture of it. And you're like, what? This doesn't line up with the A's and B's that he's getting. And then you have it documented. And then when you go into your teacher conference or you go into your next meeting and you're like, okay, you're telling me he's doing great, but this doesn't show it. This math, he's not able to add and subtract. This reading, this isn't the same. And at home, he's not reading books out loud. He's not understanding what we're reading to him. So document those things and make notes of it. And then write down your areas of concern. And before the meeting, submit it to them. I know I mentioned this before, but a parent input statement. That way there's no surprises at the meeting. You write that to them ahead of time and say, these are what I'm really concerned about. These are the areas that I really have concerns about. And that way there's no surprises at the table. They're not like, wait, what do you mean? You know that they're ahead of time getting your concerns so that they can address it at the table. And if they still come back to you and say, well, he's doing great here and he's doing great here, it's not your fault that they don't have the resources. If his IEP says that he needs this and this, or she needs this service and that service, they're legally obligated to provide it. So this is where, again, we think outside the box. We have to find solutions. It may not look the same for every child. And it may mean that we're kind of pulling from here and there to make it happen, especially with staff shortages, especially with all this stuff going on. But it can be done. I did it in a really small school where I was the only special educator coming back from COVID. And it happened. I did it. So it can be done. It's a lot, but it can be done. So we just have to think outside the box. and we can do it, but we just got to get it done. So especially when they're telling you that they don't have the resources, that goes on the prior written notice. So this is what they give you at the end of a meeting that says the school refused to do this because they said they don't have resources. Well, that's going to be written on there. Or the school, said that they're going to do this because of this. But if they're refusing to do something because they don't have the resources, that's going on the notes. They're not going to say it anymore because they don't want that on the notes. So
in that same line, I feel like another thing that's come up is when students finally have the accommodations they need, they start doing well, and then the school talks about pulling those accommodations back. And so how do families handle that when they say, like, yes, my child's getting A's and B's and is doing well, but if we take away extended time or these, movement breaks, we know that's not going to work because we've already tried that and failed, and that's why we added these accommodations. So what can families do if, they finally got to that sweet spot where things are going as they should, and now there's talk about, discontinuing some of the services or minimizing some of the accommodations?
So I think, as a special educator for as long as I was, I'm always of the mindset of we eventually want to fade them off. Like we eventually want them to become independent and learn these strategies and do it on their own. But we don't want to do it too quick because it won't work. So data, we want the data. So if they have the data to show that they've been doing it with these accommodations for such a extended period of time, okay, well, let's slowly fade the accommodations. I'm willing to try and fade them. We're not taking them away, but we can try and fade them as long as you can show me the data that shows as we're fading them, they're still here. Sorry, my camera is backwards, so as I'm moving my hands, but as long as they're staying where they are at this great point where they're still making progress. But as soon as we start to fade them, if the behavior declines or the behavior increases, whatever it may be, no. But if you can't show me the data, then we're not on board. But that's what IEPs are. It's all about progress monitoring. That's what we're doing here. And that's when you get those progress reports, you should be seeing data for each of those goals.
One last question on accommodations. I promise I'll make it short. We have a lot of parents that are disabled themselves parenting children with disabilities. So I'm hard of hearing. I asked for an accommodation at IEP meetings that I be allowed to record the meetings so that if I miss something or misunderstood, I can go back later. But families often don't know that they can request accommodations as a parent. Can you explain, how that process works and the types of things that they can request as they're going into meetings for their children?
Sure. So many times you can just request ahead of time. Sometimes, depending on what the request is, depending on who you're requesting it from, you may have to show some kind of, give some kind of documentation. You shouldn't have to, but I've seen it. So either way, you want to do it ahead of time. No one wants surprises the day of. So you want to make sure that any accommodations you may need are done when the meeting invite it's happening, all of that. So that makes it easier for everyone, and everyone can be accommodated prior to.
And speaking of accommodations and assessment tests, because you need data, right? As you mentioned, should you push back when the teacher says your child can't take the assessment test? You know, they're saying that they're not able to take the standard.
The state assessment.
Yeah.
So I would always ask why and what's making you make that decision. It is a team decision, once again. And at what age are they saying this? Because none of these decisions should be made, especially before third grade. The state testing doesn't begin until third grade. And there's no reason why any of these decisions should be made prior to that. And even at that point, that's really still too young. So yes, you should push back, ask questions, find out where this is coming from. Why are we having this discussion now? There's plenty of time to talk about this. There's plenty of time to make this decision, because this is really lining you up for diploma track or alternate track. And why are we deciding this so young?
Okay, and I think Stephanie, you had another question, didn't you?
Yeah, so I recently spoke with a parent, a military parent who she was doing her son's first IEP, and one of her son had not yet, was a preschool age student, had not yet been in a school setting before. And even though like the evaluation showed that he could do certain things, the IEP team actually set those as goals. So, let's say whatever it was, they were saying, okay, we want him to be able to draw a circle or whatever it was. And so the evaluation showed he could draw a circle. And when the parent pushed back and said, hey, he's already drawing circles, why is this a goal when he's already doing this? The IEP team said, well, we want to see that he can do it in a school setting. So it's kind of this question of like, I think the parent felt like the goal was not being set high enough. And so can you speak to, knowing when these goals are set high enough, and what does IDEA say about setting those goals?
So some of the goals, depending on, goals should be set around state curriculum for that grade level. So if this was preschool or something of that nature, it could be set on that. But yes, if the goal is too low, if the child, no matter what age, has met the goal, IEP meeting time, let's change the goal. Let's move on up. Like progress has been made. We've reached our goal. What's the next goal? You don't have to wait a year if the goal has been met to start a new goal. You can keep going. That's what the whole point of an individualized IEP program is. So we want to keep the document fluid. So if they have a reading goal and they've met the reading goal, look, let's keep going. This is great. It's great news. So if the goals are too high, on the other hand, you want to modify that as well, because if you're making no progress, then we got to say, okay, let's look at that data and decide, what do we need to modify? Is it the services? Do we need more services? Is it the goal itself? Is it the supports, the accommodations? So it could be a number of things, but yes, you can definitely change a goal mid-year.
That's great. Well, we are coming up close to the end of our hour, and I just wanted to see if Carney had any closing comments or any additional things that you would like to share with our audience.
Sure. I have a couple. I'll put the Master IEP Coach in the chat again, but I'll also put my information and just my information to my website. And then I'm not sure that came through as a link. So I'll try that again. And then I also have a IEP checklist. If you'd like to sign up for an IEP checklist that just has my 5 things to do prior to an IEP or a 504 meeting, just to be prepared. And then for those who didn't make it prior or don't want to scroll all the way back up, I'll put the Master IEP link back up, and there you can find the trainings. You can also find the different blogs that I mentioned, and I'll put my kindness blog in there too, that I mentioned as well. That's a lot of links, so sorry. But my kindness blog is also on my website, so you can find it there as well. So, and that'll help with kind of dealing with those not so nice situations at the IEP table, because they happen.
All right, we got a thank you from the audience. So thanks for attending. And then we also, Carney was nice enough to give away a free hour of coaching for her advocacy efforts. And we will choose that name at random from the people who asked the questions in both this broadcast and when we advertise it. The name will be chosen at random, and we will DM you to get you linked up with Carney. We really appreciate you spending your time today going over these tips with us and answering our questions. This is a huge void for our families. We need lots and lots and lots of help. And we really, really do appreciate it. And if anybody has anything else to say, I'll just open it up. Stephanie,
well, thank you for having me here.
Yes, I would second what everybody has said. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to all of our families who tuned in or are going to watch this later. Please send us your questions if you have something that really urgently needs addressed and we haven't assisted you, because like always, we're here for you because we are just like you. We're families with loved ones with a disability.
All right. Thank you.